Welcome to Minerva. Today we're going to be discussing the lost city of Atlantis. I'd like to introduce my co-host Duncan.
Hello.
We hope to give you enough information that you can then go away and do your own study. And this topic is one of those because it's so big, it's such a huge topic that we are really going to have to talk about this generally.
Right.
But go away, do your own research on this, find lots of different pockets of information out there, and then make up your own mind on whether or not you believe Atlantis is a place or anything else like that. So let's dive into it. How do we know what Atlantis is? Well, originally it came from Plato. Plato wrote some dialogues, and at the start of the dialogues that Plato wrote, he said that what he's writing here is true. He doesn't say that about a lot of the other things that he writes. And he says that he got his knowledge from his great-grandfathers. So it was passed down through the line of the fathers in his family, and he got it, and that's how he got the knowledge. And the story goes, essentially, that Poseidon was the god that was chosen to look after a certain part of the world, and all the gods, split the world into different pieces, and he was looking after an area which was called Atlantis. He had split that into 10 kingdoms, and he had had children with a mortal woman, and he had, essentially with this mortal woman, he had 5 sets of twins, so 10 different children. He gave each of them a kingdom to look after. And of course, the eldest was the king of the main kingdom, the city of Atlantis in the middle. And to describe Atlantis, essentially it was incredibly fertile land. It was very flat, almost perfect for growing crops and other things like that. And it was incredibly fertile land, so they would have all of the best crops, everything would work perfectly, and it was an utopian type of situation, I guess. In the middle, the city, there was concentric circles, and this is something that's synonymous when you see pictures of Atlantis. Yeah. You'll see those concentric circles where there was water, and they were able to use boating and things like that to move things around. The description that is given by Plato does sound like a very, almost sort of perfect society. And I think the fact that you've got these kind of, just the look and general overall view of it was almost, if you were to design a city, this is how it would look. But how do you feel about this? Is this something that would be possible? Do you think, in his description, in Plato's description of it, it's so descriptive. It talks about actual sizes of things and the length of something. It often uses stadia as the kind of, as the measurement. It's almost like reading the biblical version of Noah's Ark, because it's telling you exactly what these things are. So it sounds very descriptive, which makes it feel more real.
Well, I'm going to have to go through some of the stuff you've actually said, just either to correct or at least clarify.
Okay.
I mean, right, let's start off with it. I think that you opened up with about Plato was writing it as if, well, why don't you refer to his dialogues?
Yes.
There isn't actually a concept of dialogues. When he wrote about his philosophy, he wrote it in a dialogue form. He wrote it in a script form.
That was his style, wasn't it?
Yeah, which was it was the easiest way of conveying philosophical ideas. Rather than just saying, this is what I think, he would describe an idea by describing it as two people talking. So somebody has an idea, and so when somebody's the third person who's reading it, he's reading the argument go through. So obviously philosophy is a concept of argument. Well, yep. This is what I believe. Does it actually work? So just to clarify that, is the case, the dialogue on there. And it is we read about Plato, and it's normally either separated as being Timaeus and Critias, or normally just Timaeus, where this dialogue comes in. And it starts off with Timaeus. He's talking about how the world is created, and it's actually created. I might get it's one of those words that you read, you never say it out loud.
Of course.
Let's say Critias is the other character. And what it is Plato was, one of his major parts of philosophy, he was trying to work out what would be the ideal society.
Yes.
And that's the important thing. He was trying to figure out what would be the ideal society. So that's the basis of his books of The Laws and The Republic. And so he had written down what he thought was the best processes of it.
Right.
And so what he needed to do next was a case of, right, we've got these ideas of what would be an ideal society on paper. What he wanted to do was then, right, let's test it. Let's create a city, an idea of a city. We'll give it the laws that I say would work, and then we just put simulations in to find out how it works.
Okay.
And this is what Timaeus and Critias is Timaeus starts off and said, I've read this book about Plato. Why don't we think of a mythical idea where we can test his theories? And Critias turns around and says, well, actually, it is my great-great-grandfather who happens to know this story of so-and-so, which I think is great. It was meant to be Solon. He goes to Egypt. And
that's it. Yeah.
There's a lovely conversation between this Egyptian priest and Solon where he turns around and says, oh, you Greeks, although been around for centuries, you're nothing. You're ignorant.
Yeah.
We have all these records. And he talks about this place, Atlantis. And so this is where we get into the sense of whether Atlantis is true or not, because it's actually the beginning part of a story, which there is a thing. Plato, in his description through where Timaeus is turning around and said, let's make one up.
Yeah.
Critias turns around and says, well, actually, I know one and it's true. Which is when we get this big argument of, well, is it true, or is it just the character of Critias saying, or Plato using the device of, rather than have a conversation of, let's figure out what this mythical land in, let's have Critias say, this is true, cuts the story short, this is what we have. Yeah. So that's the first part. And so it's not until that conversation develops, then we then start seeing them decide on how it actually looks. And I say decide because I do see it far more of the aim of the book. It is a philosophical text.
Okay.
We've got the idea of an ideal society, and that's from there. I mean, one of the interesting things is you slip the phrase in, utopian.
Yes.
Utopian comes from a book written by Francis Bacon, which was for him to say, because it's the same thing.
Yep.
Bacon thought he had figured out the best ideal for a society.
The new Atlantis.
The new Atlantis. That's why it's called that. Not because he's another island that exists, but he used the same metaphor, building straight off Plato, going, there's this land that exists. I'm going to put these laws in it. Yeah. And he puts it in a story form for us to understand. So that's how I see for that part.
Excellent. Well, I think, talking about that utopian side of it, actually, I think it's really interesting when you start to look at the culture of the people.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the culture of the people, as they were explained, was that these were good people. They only valued the important things like love and kindness and community. They loved nature and things like that. But however, as time went on, they became more and more human, and they started to value things like gold, and they started to value things like crystals and things like that. And as the story goes, the gods became unhappy with this, and they started to punish them. And they created a council of gods to talk about it. And of course, within the book, that's the point we get to where it stops. We haven't got any more of it again. And isn't it always funny that this seems to happen with ancient texts? We have like the Gospel of Thomas, where they're talking about Jesus and Mary. And of course, there's that one word that's burned out that you can't see, when it's Jesus kissed her on the... And nobody knows what it was, right? Was it the forehead? Was it the lips? We don't know. And it's similar with this. We lose that part of the story.
There is, but to me, there's a practical reason for it, isn't it? Because for what I see as the practical side of it, because of course we have the concept of the text is to have a mythical template to test these laws on. And so when it comes to Critias, he says they're good people, so at least when you're applying these laws to it, you're just improving the goodness. So therefore, you're testing. If they were bad people to become good, then you're having a different philosophical argument in it. And of course, if they're going to use it as a template, the actual destruction bit is immaterial, because they're going to try and put the theory as they're putting to the test prior to destruction. There's no interest afterwards. So again, maybe there's not such of a big mystery of why we don't know too much afterwards. It's irrelevant.
Could be true. I mean,
could be true.
And yeah, it's such a great story. And it's actually worth, I think, on YouTube there are clips and there are people reading the audio from, or translated audio from the Plato dialogue. So it's definitely worth, if you're trying to research this, to look at that stuff. And then you've also got this modern times, what's happening now, what people are doing with Atlantis now, because that was a long time ago, but yet we're still talking about it. And I think we talk about it because of a guy called Ignatius Donnelly. And Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book, it is a great name. It's a brilliant name. And he wrote a book that was a bestseller, and he talked about Atlantis, and he talked about, the fact that Atlantis was again this utopian society and how brilliant it was, and it captured people's imagination at the time. And he added a bit of spice to it. He changed the story slightly and sort of enhanced it in certain ways. And then we move on to another guy called Edgar Cayce, who then later on starts doing past life regressions with people. And of course, all the people he was doing past life regressions with, or a lot of them, were talking about being from Atlantis and talking about that time. And then he adds his little bit of spice to it as well and says, well, there were flying cars and, space weapons and all of that sort of stuff, and it becomes a more and more modern tale where people are talking about this place. But that isn't quite what Plato said.
No, it isn't. I mean, if we're going to look at the concept of did it really exist? I mean, as a kid, I was fascinated by the subject. I did take it the sense of what if it was real. Well, to be honest, I wasn't aware of the Plato dialogue. I wasn't aware of it, of that. As a kid, you're not into the philosophy sort of breakdown of this is the way you educated in the 6th century or whatever. And so, all right, it's okay. It's outside the Pillars of Hercules. So you get go back, you've got the Azores there. And of course, back in those days, being like, I don't know, 15, 16, whatever, there was other great trees. I remember reading about, and I don't know how true it is. I'd love to read more into it, but there is a legend with the Aztecs and with the Incas who are saying that one of their origin stories is they came from an island that sank in the middle of Atlantis. And I think it was called Aztec land or something like that, which is, it's so tempting. Wouldn't you love it to be true? Yeah. So there is, does that mean it's not true? But I think there's a danger when you're trying to justify the existence of one piece of text by having the whole world as a concept of proving it. To have something like thousands of miles from the perceived incident going, well, it must be true because then on that side of the world it happened there. It's
a strange thing. I mean, you talking about that just reminds me of how much it's in popular culture as well. There's a Disney film called Atlantis. There is, we see TV shows about it and all of that sort of stuff, and it feeds a narrative that when you run it back to the original scripts, it's not quite right. And we've done that. And actually, I think it was Edgar Cayce that was saying that scrolls and writings about this were hidden all over the world under the Sphinx in different parts of the world, which would tell us all about Atlantis if we could just find them. Yeah. And it creates that wonderful treasure story. How many of these things do we talk about where there's that element of it that keeps people engaged and keeps people wanting to come back and essentially watching shows like this?
Yeah, no, why? Yeah. No, there's, it is, and it's, I suppose, I'm the cynic, but it would be a lovely idea that, I'm not a great believer in the Edgar Cayce because I'm not, that's just not my thing. But what if this case of, one thing about that Plato puts in his story, because he tries to explain why, and indirectly, why the island is talking about Greek gods and Greek ideas and Greek names.
Yeah.
Even though it predates Greece and predates almost Egypt. And he just flippantly says, we've just Hellenized the titles to make it easy to understand. Yeah. Which is fascinating in the sense, okay, that kind of makes sense. And I understand why you're now talking about Atlantis, a Greek-sounding phrase. You've got Poseidon there. That's why there's that god actually there. But it also leaves that tantalizing thing. Well, okay, what were the pre-Hellenized phrase? So when Critias, if he did say it, why didn't he say, well, the original name was this, and we've Hellenized it to this? Yeah. Because it'd be quite interesting. If it was true, what was the original name that he would have actually said for it?
So, again, looking back at this through popular culture and looking through this through the eyes of the modern world, Himmler, as we've spoken about many times, and we've got the video on Nazi occult where he goes around looking for things. This is one of the things he looks at. And it always makes me wonder, a lot of people will write this off as almost symbolism. Plato was making...
like me?
Like you. Well, I don't know if this is your opinion, because Plato, some people will say that Plato was making a point. He was making a political point, and that was he didn't believe this to be a real place. It was a fictional place to make his point.
Yeah.
Is that what you think?
It is, but I must admit, I suppose I've still got that bit of a kid in me, where it's a case of... I think it's the reason we do it, the reason we get on. It's a case of, that is what I believe academically, but I love the idea that, let's take Edgar Cayce again as an example, where if he was, say, like channeling, and he is caking these phrases in. And we know that Atlantis is not really the original word.
Yeah.
We're taking a sense of how do you transport all of that knowledge when the word would be ambiguous as it goes on.
Okay.
I mean, if languages change, I mean, Ed Case, did he only channel in English when, of course, all the nations, all the cultures that were meant to hold this information would have had their different languages to it? So what if there's a misinterpretation that there is a way of living beforehand? I don't know. I don't. I would love to, but I don't know.
See, I honestly believe that Plato believed it.
Really?
I'm not saying it happened and it was true, but I think it was passed down to him. I think this is something that somebody told him and he genuinely wanted to write about it. And back to your point earlier, he writes in that dialogue style. So he writes in the style which he is accustomed to.
Yeah.
And I think that was his way of explaining a political point. And I think there is, as you say, there are changes within there that we know that he's done it to make it more acceptable or easier for the reader. But I think that he genuinely believed it. And if we look at the modern stuff that's coming out now as well, it's fascinating. You've got people like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock and people like that looking at this from a geological, and a worldly perspective.
Yeah.
And they're saying that the place that he describes is almost just off the shore of Spain, to be,
Yeah, you could read it that way.
You could read it that way. And there is a place there where there are 3 tectonic plates which meet, which is quite rare. And actually, that the experts are saying, if there was a place that sunk, that would be the place. And how did he guess that?
Well, whether he did guess it, but there's like a case of, we know several places. I'm from Norfolk.
Yes.
They said the Wash was flooded. Holland, it's reclaimed land that's come up and down. We have areas that we think solid ground, but you look a bit back in its history and it's not there. I mean, we've got I've been lucky enough to have gone there. There's Santorini Islands, where it was the volcano island, which, I mean, that's meant to be another place for it. It's again, if you're going to look at it's outside, all we know is it's outside the Pillars of Hercules, which that part of Spain is.
Yeah.
But so there's a massive great ocean out of there, which
That's
kind of
true.
gives you the whole liability. I mean, Edgar Cayce was turning around and said that it was off the Bermuda Islands. And I remember reading about there was a causeway there and there was Corinthian pillars and stuff found outside, which of course feeds into what we see of, because we see the depictions of Atlantis as a very Greek building, as a Greek representation, because we superfluously read the story, forgetting that Plato actually said it wasn't actually Greek. We just Hellenized it, so it wouldn't have Greek pillars. And I think somebody figured out earlier that the pillars that were found off the Bermuda Islands was a case of when ships were going back and forth trading, if they were carrying heavy weights one way, because of course that's what the ships are designed for, rather than go back empty, they put pillars or marble weights in, so the boat. And so when they didn't need them, throw them over the side. It had no value anymore. But it's,
It's tantalising. I think there's, again, look at this modern research. People are looking everywhere for it, to your point. We see people looking for it at the poles. We see people looking for it, out in Asia, again, Bermuda Triangle, off the coast of Spain. And also in the desert, there are people that thought that, again, they'd seen concentric circles, some that look similar, and they started looking. So there's lots of information for anybody that's interested in finding out more about this subject. Those are the places to go and look. Look at Randall Carlson.
Well, you said them off, go off to the desert. And
don't go. I wouldn't go straight out into the desert, into no man's land. But start looking at those sorts of things, because there's where you'll find the detail and the interest in that. But again, as we're talking about this generally to kind of tee it up for people, one of the things that I found fascinating throughout this, and it's sort of been in the back of my mind, is that as humans, we think we're so smart and we think, everything that we know is exactly as it is and it will never change. And we do that very often with science. We do that very often with philosophy and all of those things. We think we're completely right until we're wrong, and then we just completely change. And that's what this is like, because if you look back at Troy, that was seen as a mythical place that was all about, symbolic storytelling and all of that. Nobody believed it. And then, of course, we find Troy, and now all of a sudden Troy is a real thing. Yeah,
and found by an amateur archaeologist rather than... and I think even through his lifetime, it took his lifetime for the academics to accept that, you found Troy. Yeah. But that also links into something that we discussed before, where how is it that we have something that is seen as this lovely phrase. This is a utopian, this perfect ideal. And first we just see a place where it's nice living.
Yeah.
Then of course it escalates to, well, as you say, education, flying cars, etc. Why do we do that? And I think that's because to epitomize something that is ideal, because our own lives improves, to be greater than that, it has to be greater. So of course, if we're looking at Atlantis being a real island, to look like paradise, if you're looking at Greek history, or Greek of ancient Greece, if you had an island where it was easy to grow crops, animals lived easily, so the actual effort to actually farm, etc., wasn't that much. So you could spend most of your time lying back next to the neighbouring island that could only survive off fish, or the one that's fighting to get cattle going. If there was an island like that, maybe like the Santorini Island, maybe that it was easy to live on there, it becomes a paradise. But when our lives are so much easier where we don't have to fight for food and stuff like that, we need to raise the bar on how we describe paradise. And so I can imagine, if it's not exactly true, that we have to escalate the abilities of Atlantis beyond just easy living to, oh, they could do so-and-so and do so-and-so. So I think we do need to separate or understand what we see as being paradise.
And I think that's really apparent, because we're putting on this whole theory based on things that we are really interested in. Technology is a thing that we're really interested in, right? So again, we're raising the stakes there on the technology side and not looking at other things, which is quite apparent. So there is so much research going on about this still. I think of all the topics that we've spoken about on our Minerva talks, this is one that I genuinely believe has a lot more to go. I think over the years we're going to find out more and more about Atlantis. And I do think they might find that there was a sunken city or a sunken world. Yeah, I do. I genuinely believe it. But I think it's not going to be flying cars. We're not going to find old computers or anything like that. But I think it might just be a different civilization that had to move from there because of some kind of cataclysm. So please do like and subscribe the channel. We always like to read your comments as well, so please do leave them there. Let us know what you think. What do you think about Plato's idea, and also, is it a real thing? I mean, Duncan and I are kind of quite split on this as usual.
Oh, surprise!
And there's no surprise there. But it was, it's a great topic to discuss. It's really enjoyable, and please do like, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.